The beeping of the tablets pulled both teams from their post-war game banter. Darren, still grinning from the earlier match, glanced down at his screen. "All right, looks like it's time to pack up and head to our campsites. Hope everyone brought their tents and bug spray." Eli, sitting beside Omega, raised an eyebrow. "What is bug spray?" Darren smirked. "Oh, you'll find out soon enough, Keebler." Gunner's team checked their own tablets, and Gunner grunted as he stood up, his new arm flexing slightly as he adjusted it. "All right, let's move out. Looks like we've got our next challenge starting tomorrow morning." As the teams split up, Darren made one last jab at Gunner. "Don't get too comfortable, old man. I'm still not done with you." Gunner smirked. "You better be ready for tomorrow, Darren. You're going to need more than a fancy wolfmobile to win this one." Nightfall. Scouts in the shadows. The campsites were located on opposite sides of the sprawling training grounds, deep in the rugged terrain. Darren's team reached theirs just before dusk, the sun casting long shadows across the desert as they began to set up camp. Omega, still clearly irritated from the earlier parachute experience, paced around the perimeter, his growls low and constant. Every now and then, his gaze would settle on Darren, and the tension between them was palpable. "You know," Darren said, eyeing the wolf warily as he pitched his tent, "I think Omega might actually try to eat me in my sleep." Eli, adjusting her own tent with elven precision, shot him a glance. "He doesn't like being forced into things he didn't choose. He's not like the others." Darren snorted, keeping a careful distance from Omega. "Yeah, well, I didn't exactly enjoy being strapped to him during the jump either." Clora, finishing her setup with practiced ease, gave a small chuckle from her spot near the fire pit. "Maybe if you stop calling him Furball, he'll warm up to you." Darren grumbled but didn't respond. He had a feeling the tension between him and Omega wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. Meanwhile, on the other side of the training grounds, Gunner's team was settling in. Karina, always stealthy and methodical, scouted the perimeter, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of activity. Desera had taken the lead on setting up the campfire, her military background evident in how quickly and efficiently she worked. Gunner, however, was finding it more difficult to handle the smaller tasks with his new arm. As he struggled to set up his own tent, the fabric slipping out of his mechanical grasp, Karina approached. "You need help?" she asked, not unkindly. Gunner grimaced but nodded, still getting used to it. Karina knelt down and made quick work of the setup. "Don't worry about it, that's what the team's for." As they worked in silence, the shadows around the camp seemed to deepen, the desert growing quieter. Unbeknownst to either team, the NTC training OPFOR, the opposition forces, were already on the move, silently scouting both camps from a distance. They moved like ghosts through the night, observing every detail, every weakness. Tomorrow's challenge wasn't just about teamwork. It was also about avoiding the watchful eyes of their hidden opponents. Morning. The obstacle course. The next morning, as the sun rose over the desert, both teams received their new assignment on their tablets. The screen blinked with the location of the new challenge, a massive team-building course filled with towering walls, wide ravines, and narrow pathways with out-of-bounds zones on either side. Each team would be given an 80-pound crate, and their task was to move it through the course without crossing into any out-of-bounds areas. The penalty? Elimination. Darren's team arrived at the course first, the Wolfmobile once again giving them a slight advantage in speed. They parked it just outside the starting zone, and Darren grinned as he looked over the expanse of the course. "Well, this should be fun," he said, eyeing the tall walls and wide ravines. Eli, who had been inspecting the crate, raised an eyebrow. "How are we supposed to carry this through all of that?" "We're not carrying it," Darren replied, his grin widening. "We're going to get creative." And Omega stood nearby, watching silently. Omega growled, his eyes narrowing at Darren as if he knew what was coming. "Relax, Furball," Darren said, patting the wolf on the head before quickly pulling his hand away. "We'll be fine." Clora. Meanwhile, Gunner's team arrived at the course on their electric dirt bikes. As they dismounted, they quickly assessed the challenge ahead. Gunner's face was serious as he looked over the towering obstacles. "This isn't going to be easy," he muttered. His mechanical arm twitched slightly as he flexed it, the weight of the challenge pressing down on him. Desera, ever the strategist, nodded. "We'll have to work together on this. That crate is going to slow us down." The challenge begins. The teams lined up at their respective starting points, each one staring down the long stretch of desert terrain. The outpost lay ahead in the distance, but between them and their goal were towering walls, narrow ravines, and obstacles designed to test their teamwork. Darren's team moved first, hoisting the crate onto the Wolfmobile. The vehicle's sturdy frame and strong suspension allowed it to carry the weight with ease, and Darren grinned as they began to move through the course. "This is almost too easy," he muttered to Clora, who was manning the turret, keeping an eye on the surroundings. But Eli wasn't so sure. "The obstacles will get tougher. We should be prepared." Gunner's team, meanwhile, had to rely on their combined strength to move the crate. Gunner, normally the one to shoulder the heaviest loads, was struggling to keep his mechanical arm steady. Every time he tried to grab hold of the crate, it slipped, and the frustration was clear on his face. "Let me take the lead," Desera said, stepping in. "You handle the navigation." Gunner didn't argue. He knew his limitations and trusted his team. They worked together, slowly maneuvering the crate over the first set of obstacles. The ravine was the first real test, its jagged walls steep and unforgiving. Karina, with her agility and balance, managed to cross first, setting up a rope system for the others. As they worked, the tension between the two teams was palpable. Both knew that one misstep could mean the difference between victory and defeat, the ravine and the ambush. As Darren's team approached the ravine, Omega growled, sensing something off. He paced restlessly, his eyes scanning the rocks below. "What is it, boy?" Darren asked, glancing down into the ravine. Before he could react, one of the NTC OPFOR scouts revealed themselves, firing a few non-lethal rounds toward them. The shots hit the rocks around them, missing but sending a clear message. They were being watched. Clora quickly spun the turret, firing back with a spray of energy rounds. The OPFOR retreated, disappearing into the desert. "Looks like we're not alone out here," she muttered. Darren grinned. "Good. I was starting to get bored." They managed to get the crate across the ravine using a combination of brute force and the Wolfmobile's winch system, but Omega's constant growls made it clear the OP4 scouts were still out there, watching their every move. The final wall. Gunner versus Darren. As both teams neared the final obstacle, a towering wall that required them to work together to lift the crate over, Gunner's team began to close the gap. The Wolfmobile was fast, but the obstacles had slowed Darren's team down, enough for Gunner's team to catch up. Gunner, his arm still struggling with the weight, looked over at the wall. "We're going to have to use everything we've got to get this thing over." Desera, Karina, and the others moved quickly, setting up ropes and securing the crate. But as they started to lift it, Darren's voice echoed across the field. "Need some help, old man?" Gunner looked up to see Darren's team already halfway up the wall, using the Wolfmobile's winch to hoist their crate. "I've got this," Gunner growled, pushing forward despite the strain on his arm. But it was no use. His arm wasn't cooperating, and for the first time, Gunner had to rely entirely on his team. With Desera's leadership and Karina's quick thinking, they managed to get the crate to the top, just as Darren's team crossed the finish line. Debriefing, jokes and lessons learned. Both teams gathered at the end of the course, breathing heavily but grinning. Darren slapped Gunner on the back. "Not bad, old man. You almost had us there." Gunner smirked, though there was a flicker of frustration in his eyes. "Next time, Darren." The Wolfmobile sat nearby, its large wolf ears and tail swaying in the desert breeze. Clora and Omega both looked at it with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "I still can't believe you actually built that thing," Gunner muttered, shaking his head. Darren grinned. Hey, it worked, didn't it? As they all laughed and exchanged stories about the day's challenges, Eliana stepped forward to give her judgment. Both teams showed exceptional skill, but I have to say, Darren's team had the edge with their creative use of transportation. Gunnar groaned. All right, fine, you win this round. But deep down, both teams knew the real victory was in how they had come together. They were stronger, more united, and ready for whatever came next. The sun had set by the time both teams finally gathered around the campfire. After the grueling obstacle course and close competition, the air was filled with a sense of camaraderie, even if some friendly rivalry still lingered. They sat on the ground, digging into their meals ready to eat, MREs, provided by the NTC training base. Darren, ever the joker, held up his pack and inspected the label. Great, more chicken with mystery sauce, Darren said, tearing into the package with an exaggerated sigh. Can't they give us something other than these delicacies for once? Eli, seated across from him, poked at her own meal with a mix of confusion and mild disgust. This isn't food, is it? Darren chuckled. Keebler, you've still got a lot to learn about Earth cuisine. This is military fine dining at its peak. Just wait till you try the peanut butter. Gunnar, who was quietly working on his own meal, looked up with a smirk. Stop complaining. It's better than the cold rations we used to have back in the day. Darren shot him a grin, taking a large bite of his food before speaking up. Speaking of back in the day, did you happen to notice we weren't alone today? Gunnar raised an eyebrow, his attention shifting. What do you mean? Darren leaned forward, lowering his voice. We had a run-in with the NTC OPFOR earlier. They were scouting us out during the obstacle course. Didn't hit any of us, but it was a reminder that we're being watched. Karina, who had been sitting silently nearby, glanced up. I noticed the same. There were scouts around our perimeter last night too. They're good, barely made a sound, but they're there. Gunnar's gaze darkened, though he didn't seem surprised. That's part of the training. They'll keep testing us, waiting for an opening. Good thing we're giving them a show, Darren said, though his tone was more serious than usual. But it makes you wonder what they're planning next. Before anyone could respond, the crunch of boots on gravel drew their attention. Sergeant Major Kick, the rugged and imposing figure in charge of the NTC, walked into camp, his presence commanding the immediate respect of everyone there. Behind him, Eliana followed, her usual calm demeanour unshaken, though her silver eyes sparkled with quiet amusement. Good evening, Echo Division, Kick said with a grin, scanning the tired but determined faces around the fire. Heard you had an interesting day. Darren leaned back on his elbows, raising his MRE in mock salute. Just another day in paradise, Sergeant Major. Kick chuckled, shaking his head. Well, enjoy that while you can. Tomorrow's going to be even more fun. Gunnar gave Kick a knowing look. What's the next challenge? Eliana stepped forward, her voice soft but firm as she explained. Tomorrow you'll be making a 20-mile hike to your next campsite. Darren's mouth dropped open in exaggerated shock. Wait, on foot? Kick nodded, crossing his arms over his chest. That's right, Darren. No Wolfmobile tomorrow. No bikes, no tricks. Just you, your team, and the trail. You'll be navigating through rough terrain, and the OPFOR will be watching. Stay sharp. Clora, seated next to Omega, gave a small nod. We'll manage. Darren, still trying to recover from the idea of walking 20 miles, shook his head in disbelief. But why on foot? We've got perfectly good bikes and transportation. He glanced over at the Wolfmobile, parked not far from their camp. Kick's grin widened. Because this isn't about getting there fast, Darren. It's about endurance, teamwork, and learning to rely on each other when the terrain works against you. Gunnar gave Darren a sidelong look. You complaining already? It's just a walk. Yeah, sure, Darren muttered, sitting back with a defeated expression. Just a 20-mile walk? No big deal. Eliana turned to the group, her eyes lingering on each of them. This will be a test of your unity and strength as a team. Tomorrow isn't just about who gets there first. It's about how you work together and how you handle the unexpected. And trust me, there will be plenty of that. Darren groaned, rubbing his face. Fantastic. I'll make sure to pack extra sarcasm. Omega, still eyeing Darren with his usual distaste, let out a low growl. Darren glanced at the wolf and sighed. Oh, great. Looks like Furball here is ready to help me pack my sarcasm into a body bag. Clora chuckled, scratching Omega behind the ears. You'll be fine, Darren. Just try not to get yourself eaten before we reach the campsite. Kik gave the team one last look before heading off into the night, leaving Eliana behind. Rest up, Kik called over his shoulder. Tomorrow's going to test all of you. As the campfire crackled and the team settled in for the night, Darren couldn't help but mutter under his breath. 20 miles on foot? You've got to be kidding me. Gunnar chuckled, stretching his legs out and adjusting his mechanical arm. You wanted war games, Darren. This is just the start. Darren smirked, leaning back against his pack. Yeah. Just don't expect me to carry you, old man. The fire burned low as the teams fell into a comfortable silence, mentally preparing for the challenge that awaited them in the morning. The cool desert air was still when the OPFOR crept closer, in the dead of night. Silent shadows flitted between the tents, their footsteps barely audible as they slipped through the camp. It was a calculated maneuver, part of the NTC's game to keep both teams on edge. They moved with purpose, targeting one tent in particular, Darren's. With a few deft strokes, one of the OPFOR soldiers scrawled a message in bold white chalk across the side of Darren's tent. Their silent work done, the team slipped back into the night as stealthily as they had come. When the sun rose over the desert, the camp slowly stirred to life. Darren, as usual, was the last one up, grumbling as he crawled out of his tent, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The others were already packing up, but his attention was quickly drawn to the muffled chuckles coming from Eli, Clora, and Karina. They were gathered near his tent, trying to stifle their laughter. What's so funny? Darren asked, clearly not amused. Clora pointed to the side of his tent, where the bold white message stood out. We're watching you. Darren's face twisted in mock horror. Very funny. So now they're pulling pranks on us. Great. Next thing you know, they'll be setting up whoopee cushions under my seat. Eli smirked, crossing her arms. Maybe they're just letting you know they're in control, Darren. He scratched his head, looking at the message. I knew we were being watched, but this is ridiculous. Before anyone could respond, Sergeant Major Kik arrived in camp, his usual confident swagger in full force. His sharp eyes scanned the group before settling on the Wolfmobile, sitting proudly near the edge of camp. Morning, Echo Division, Kik greeted, though there was an obvious gleam of amusement in his eyes. Mind if I borrow the keys to this fine piece of equipment? He pointed to the Wolfmobile. Heard a lot about it. Figured I'd take it for a test drive while you lot hoof it. Darren's face fell, and he fumbled for the keys in his pocket, grumbling as he handed them over. Take care of her, Sarge. She's special. Kik grinned, twirling the keys. Don't worry, Darren. I'll take real good care of your baby. With that, Kik hopped into the Wolfmobile and, with a roar of its engine, sped off into the desert, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. Well, there goes our ride, Darren muttered, shaking his head. I guess it's all on foot from here. Gunnar clapped him on the back with a smirk. You'll live, Darren. Time to get moving. The sun was already high in the sky as the team started their 20-mile road march. The heat beat down on them relentlessly, making the trek even more grueling. Each team had split off to their separate routes, winding through rough terrain and open stretches of desert. The packs on their backs felt heavier with every step, and the pace they set was grueling. But it wasn't just the heat and the distance that made things difficult. Along the way, the OPFOR had left their mark. The first sign of trouble came when Omega suddenly stopped, growling low as he sniffed the ground. Clora knelt next to him, her sharp eyes scanning the area. Trap, she muttered, pointing out the faint wire hidden beneath a thin layer of sand. Looks like the OPFOR laid a few surprises for us. Darren knelt beside her, inspecting the trap. What is it? Nothing lethal, Clora replied, but it'll definitely ruin your day if you step on it. Gunnar barked orders to the team to stay sharp. They navigated around the trap carefully, but it wasn't the only one. Every few miles, the OPFOR had left other distractions and hazards. Pressure plates, false trails, and even dummy mines meant to slow them down. Halfway through the march, the team hit another challenge, a stretch of open desert completely exposed. It was the perfect place for an ambush. They moved cautiously, but just as they were halfway across, a loud boom echoed through the air. "Incoming!" Karina shouted, throwing herself to the ground as simulated explosions went off around them. Smoke filled the air and the team scrambled for cover behind rocks and bushes. It was clear the OPFOR was testing them, forcing them to adapt under fire. "Nice try!" Darren yelled over the noise, firing off a few non-lethal training shots at the hidden OPFOR positions, though they quickly faded back into the landscape. After the smoke cleared, they continued the march, weary but still determined. Each step felt heavier, the desert stretching endlessly in front of them. By the time they neared the new campsite, it had been 6 hours of constant walking, traps, and distractions. The new campsite was a welcome sight when they finally arrived. The team was exhausted, their bodies aching from the relentless march. As they dropped their packs and started to set up camp, there was little conversation, just the sound of tents being assembled and canteens being emptied. Darren flopped onto the ground, staring up at the sky. 20 miles. No big deal, right? "Stop complaining," Clora shot back, though she was clearly just as tired. Eli stretched her arms, her face flushed from the heat. "At least we made it in one piece." Gunnar, though tired, immediately started helping Karina and the others set up camp. His new arm, though powerful, had its limitations, and he was forced to rely more on his team to help him navigate the rough terrain. As they settled in, Jewel arrived at the campsite, her presence a welcome relief. She moved from person to person, checking vitals, hydration levels, and making sure no one had suffered any injuries during the march. "Looks like you all made it through," Jewel said, smiling as she packed away her medical kit. "How's everyone feeling?" "Tired," Darren answered, sitting up. "And hungry. Again." Jewel handed him a fresh bottle of water. "Rest up, you've got more to go tomorrow." The team groaned in unison, but the mood was lightened by the familiar routine of their camp. As the sun set, they gathered once more around the campfire, eating another round of MREs in relative silence, though Darren's complaints about the food never stopped. Just before they settled in for the night, Gunnar sat beside Darren, keeping his voice low. "You think the OPFOR is done messing with us?" Darren shook his head, a grin on his face. "Nah, they're just getting started. Tomorrow's going to be fun." With the next leg of the training looming, the team prepared for another night of restless sleep, knowing full well the OPFOR would be watching their every move. In the stillness of the desert night, with only the soft rustling of tents and the distant howl of wind, the camp of Echo Division slept. Exhausted from the grueling 20-mile march, everyone had finally settled into their makeshift beds. The cool breeze provided a momentary respite from the heat of the day, and for a brief moment peace seemed to settle over the camp. But then, boom! A loud explosion shattered the silence, followed by the rapid staccato of automatic gunfire. The sound came from the north side of the camp, and within seconds, the entire team was on high alert. Tents rustled as team members scrambled out of their sleeping bags, grabbing weapons and rushing toward the source of the noise. Gunnar was already halfway to the north perimeter, his mechanical arm humming as he hefted Starbreaker. Behind him, Darren, Karina, Eli, and Clora were right on his heels, ready to engage whatever threat had broken their rest. "OPFOR," Gunnar growled, knowing immediately that this was another move by the NTC's opposition force. "They're testing us again." As they reached the north side, they saw the source of the chaos, Several OPFOR soldiers, in their night vision gear, had breached the perimeter. Gunfire blazed through the night as the Echo Division team returned fire with their training rounds, their shots lighting up the desert in flashes of neon blue and red. Darren ducked behind a large boulder, firing off shots as he glanced over at Eli, who had taken cover near a pile of sandbags. "They're pushing hard!" Darren shouted. "What the hell are they up to?" Eli, calm and precise, took aim and eliminated one of the OPFOR soldiers with a well-placed shot. "Feels like a diversion." "Then what's the real target?" Darren muttered to himself as he ducked back out to fire again. As if answering his question, the unmistakable roar of the Wolfmobile's engine echoed through the night. Darren's eyes widened, and he swiveled around just in time to see the Wolfmobile speeding through camp, its turret-mounted minigun blazing as it sprayed the area with non-lethal training rounds. Gunnar and Darren both froze for a moment, watching in disbelief as the vehicle, their prized Wolfmobile, lit up the camp like a fireworks display, scattering their team as they dove for cover. "No," Darren muttered, horror dawning on his face. And Gunnar, meanwhile, was already charging toward the speeding vehicle, fury etched across his face. "Darren, you leave the keys in it!" Darren scrambled to his feet, holding up his hands defensively. "Nope," he grinned sheepishly, pulling the keys from his pocket and holding them up. "See, right here." Both of them turned to watch as the Wolfmobile continued its wild path out of camp, kicking up sand and dust, the turret blazing as it sped off into the desert night. At the same time, realization dawned on both of them. "Kick," they said in unison, groaning as they shook their heads. Gunnar's jaw clenched. He must have made a copy when he moved it earlier. That crafty bastard. Darren scratched his head, trying to suppress a grin. Well, that's a problem. The rest of the team slowly regrouped, the immediate threat of the OPFOR fading as they pulled back, having completed their mission. The Wolfmobile was gone, now in enemy hands, or at least in Sergeant Major Kick's hands. Clora, who had been silent until now, gave Darren a pointed look. "So, the Wolfmobile is gone, and they just lit up our camp with it. What's next?" Darren sighed, tossing the keys into the air and catching them. "Guess we gotta get it back." The next morning, the team was still buzzing from the previous night's chaos. The tent with the chalk message now seemed like a light-hearted prank compared to what had just happened. SGM Kick had once again proven he was always 2 steps ahead. Gunnar and Darren met with Eliana as the sun rose, her ethereal presence as calm as ever. She raised an eyebrow as they approached her, clearly amused by the previous night's events. "So, the Wolfmobile?" she asked with a small smirk. "Is that what you're calling it?" Darren groaned. "Don't remind me. Kick has it now. Apparently making a key to it wasn't beneath him." Gunnar crossed his arms, his mechanical hand twitching slightly. "We need it back, Eliana. He's going to use it against us during today's exercise." Eliana nodded, her silver eyes gleaming with mischief. "It will be interesting to see how that plays out. I'll keep score, of course." With that settled, the teams were given their next assignment, a 20-mile foot march to the new camp, with a series of distractions set up by the OPFOR along the way. The day promised to be grueling. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, Echo divisions split into their respective teams and began the trek. Gunnar, Karina, and their team were immediately cautious. The previous night had been a reminder that they were being watched, and the OPFOR would likely be even more aggressive now. Meanwhile, Darren and Eli led their team along their own route. Omega, as always, kept his distance from Darren, clearly still holding a grudge from the parachuting incident. Every time Darren tried to talk to the wolf, Omega would simply turn his head away, tail flicking in disdain. "You know," Darren said to Eli as they hiked, "I'm pretty sure your wolf still hates me." Eli chuckled softly. "He'll come around, eventually." "Right," Darren muttered. "Maybe by the time we're retired." As the teams navigated the harsh terrain, they found more signs of OPFOR activity. Tripwires were hidden along the path, and at one point Karina narrowly avoided stepping into a pitfall disguised by loose sand. The constant traps and distractions slowed them down, but by early afternoon, both teams reached their new camp, exhausted from the march. As they set up camp once again, the familiar weariness settled in. Muscles sore from the miles of walking and the tension of constantly being on alert. The camp buzzed with low conversation as the teams huddled around their MREs, the food as uninspiring as ever. Darren poked at his meal with a fork, shaking his head. You ever notice how MREs somehow make hunger seem better? Gunnar, sitting across from him, was quiet for a moment before leaning in. Did you notice we were being followed? Darren's eyes flicked up, his expression serious. Yeah, ran into them last night after they took the Wolfmobile. They're not done with us yet, Gunnar added, his voice low. Keep an eye out. Just as the tension began to rise again, SGM Kik and Eliana entered the camp. Kik, grinning like a fox, tossed Darren a mock salute. How's it going, Echo Division? Kik said with a smirk. Enjoy the little surprise last night? Darren glared at him but couldn't hide his amusement. You really couldn't resist, could you? Kik shrugged, completely unapologetic. It was right there. You gotta admit, the look on your face was priceless. Gunnar cut in. When do we get it back? Kik grinned wider. Oh, don't worry. You'll get your chance. But for now, I've got something else to tell you. Tomorrow, you've got a 20-mile hike on foot to your next location. Both teams groaned, but there was no way around it. The challenge was clear. Another grueling march awaited them, and they had no idea what the OPFOR had planned next. As the sun set, and they settled in for another night, there was an unspoken understanding between both teams. This was more than just a training exercise. It was a game of strategy, skill, and endurance. And they weren't just fighting the OPFOR. They were fighting for pride and bragging rights. But first, they had to survive another night in the desert. The night was unusually still, the oppressive heat of the desert replaced by a biting chill that clung to the air. Gunnar stood by the edge of the camp, staring out into the distance. He'd been on edge since the previous night, knowing the OPFOR was still lurking nearby, testing their every move, waiting for the right moment to strike again. His mind churned through different strategies, but something wasn't sitting right. That's when he felt her presence beside him. Clora. Silent as ever, her eyes gleamed under the dim moonlight, and her expression was sharp, intense. She crossed her arms, standing next to him, but she wasn't here for casual conversation. Gunnar, she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with the kind of determination that signaled something was about to change. I'm done with the defense. We've been playing their game, reacting to their moves. She turned her gaze to him, eyes hardening. It's time to remind them who we truly are. Gunnar glanced at her, sensing the shift. This wasn't the measured, strategic Clora who usually paced their approach. This was something else, something fiercer. We are the pack first and always, Clora continued, the conviction in her voice unwavering. And I'm tired of letting them take the first step. Gunnar let the words sink in, his mechanical arm clenching instinctively. She was right. They'd been defensive long enough, biding their time, waiting for the OPFOR to make the next move. But that wasn't how the pack operated. They were hunters, predators. They didn't hide. Clora turned slightly, her eyes shifting to Karina, who was sitting nearby sharpening her blades, quietly watching the night. Karina, Clora called, her voice carrying a subtle challenge. It's time for you to stop holding back. No more shadows. I need you to do what you do best. Take out our watchers. Karina's eyes flicked up, narrowing as a slow grin spread across her face. She ran her thumb along the edge of her blade, the familiar weight of it calming her nerves. About time, she said, her voice low but laced with anticipation. They won't even know what hit them. Clora nodded and turned toward Desera, who had been observing the conversation from the other side of the camp, always ready but rarely speaking unless necessary. Desera, Clora said, her tone more measured but no less intense. You know what needs to be done? Recon. They're close. Too close. Take Ashley and Beta. Find their base. It's out there, and we need eyes on it before we make our next move. Desera's golden eyes glimmered with focus as she rose to her feet, slinging her sniper rifle across her back. Got it, she said simply, her mind already working through the best route to take. I'll be back before dawn. Clora gestured to the rest of the team, her voice commanding but calm. The rest of us will stay here, act like we're still hunkered down. We'll play the part, make it look like we're waiting out the night. But we'll cover Desera's team until she locates their base. As the others nodded in agreement, Gunnar finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. We strike when Desera gives us the location. Clara's eyes locked with his, and for a brief moment there was an understanding between them, an unspoken agreement that the tide was about to turn. We strike hard, and we remind them that we're not just some team playing by the rules, we're the pack. Gunnar nodded, his resolve hardening. This was it. No more waiting. No more games. They were going to take the fight to the OPFOR, and they were going to show them exactly what it meant to be hunted by the pack. Karina moved like a shadow, blending seamlessly into the darkness as she slipped out of camp. The OPFOR had been watching them for days now, but tonight they wouldn't see her coming. Her blades glinted faintly under the sliver of moonlight as she made her way silently through the rocky terrain. Her mission was simple. Take out the Watchers. She knew they were close, tucked into the natural folds of the desert landscape, using night vision to keep tabs on Echo Division's every move. But Karina had a way of moving that defied even the most advanced surveillance. She'd been trained to disappear in plain sight, and tonight, the OPFOR was about to learn that the hard way. Desera, Ashley, and Beta moved quickly but quietly through the desert, the sand shifting beneath their feet as they made their way toward the location Clora had suspected the OPFOR base to be. Desera's eyes scanned the horizon, her instincts sharpened from years of recon missions. She could feel it, the subtle shifts in the terrain, the patterns of movement that suggested the OPFOR was nearby. They were getting close. Keep low, Desera murmured, her voice barely audible over the wind. We don't know how heavily fortified they are yet. Ashley, ever the quick shot, gripped her weapon tightly, her eyes darting around the landscape, searching for any sign of movement. Beta, the massive wolf, padded silently beside them, his ears flicking back and forth as he sniffed the air for any signs of danger. Back at camp, the rest of the team settled in, doing their best to look as though they were resting for the night. But their senses were on high alert. Every member of the pack ready to move the moment Desera gave the signal. Gunnar glanced at Clora, who was leaning against a nearby rock, her expression calm but lethal. You think this will draw them out? He asked quietly. Clora smirked, her eyes gleaming in the low light. It's not about drawing them out, Gunnar, it's about hunting them down. And once Desera finds their base, we'll show them what happens when they underestimate the pack. Hours passed, and just before dawn, Desera's voice crackled over the comms. We found them, sending coordinates now. Gunnar stood, his hand gripping his rifle as the familiar rush of battle surged through his veins. He turned to the rest of the team, his voice low and steady. Let's move. The pack was ready, and by the end of the day, the OPFOR would know exactly why they were feared.
Well, you found your way to the end, haven't you? That must mean you're curious, and we love curiosity around here. Before you vanish into the ether, take a moment to subscribe. It's just a click, and trust me, you'll want to stay in the loop for what comes next. And while you're at it, give the video a like. The energy exchange is good for you. Hit that notification bell too. You wouldn't want to miss out on any of our magical misadventures. Who knows what I might conjure up next? Alright, off you go. But remember, I'll know if you didn't subscribe. See you on the other side.